People in poverty are the poorest citizens within society. More resources than just finances are measured to get, but this is the most common baseline. It is an assessment of acceptable living conditions and represented by a lack of resources. The baseline used is the societal median, and anything less than 60% of this is classed as poverty. In 2022-2023, the median income was £621 per week, putting the poverty line at £373 per week. There are minimum living daily needs required for survival. When these needs are not met, this is classed as absolute poverty. This baseline varies country to country based on economic condition, but is an assessment of a lack of access to food, safe water, shelter, sanitisation, education, healthcare and material needs. It is unaffected by economic growth and adjusts for inflation only, allowing for identifiable markers in any given year. In the UK, absolute poverty rates increase from 9% to 12% post-housing costs. Households that receive 50% or less than the median income can afford their basic needs but little additional. This is classed as relative poverty. Relative deprivation is struggling to meet the same standards of living as everyone else, missing out on luxuries such as TV, internet, education, clean clothing, safe house free from abuse and neglect. This can lead to the feelings of entrapment, especially when this is a permanent living standard. The criteria changes country to country when the country experiences growth. These figures adjust for household size, but there is no adjustments for disability or long-term health conditions. People are being financially left behind and struggling to meet the necessities for normal activities and opportunities. This affects 14 million Brits today. Persistent poverty is difficult to observe from the data, but the Scottish Government identified this as those who receive 50% or less than the median for 3 out of 4 years. There are concerns regarding the long-term impact this has on mental and physical health. 8% of the population experience persistent poverty, and this is rising. Children who have an 18% chance of experiencing persistent poverty achieve lower academic scores, which brings into question the impact on their cognitive development. Social exclusion is a relatively new term for individuals, groups and areas that cannot participate in the social system by not having the same access to the same opportunities. This can be due to a combination of factors such as unemployment, poor skills, low income, poor housing, high crime, bad health and family breakdown. It is noticed that a lack of access to one of these will impact the other. For example, limited education can lead to low work fulfillment and lower earning potential. Individuals, groups and areas experiencing poverty become excluded and unable to access the resources for a decent life, relatively speaking. Society determines this standard. In the UK, it is necessary to have internet to access jobs and public services, smart clothing including smart shoes for interviews, and to be able to pay for further education to access higher earning potentials, as well as access to decent and safe housing. The Industrial Revolution had a significant impact on urbanisation and technological advancement, initially worsening poverty with long hours for little pay for labourers, increasing misery with harsh conditions, child labour. There was no job security, leading to large labour pools and the mistreatment of workers. Post-1945, the Labour government set out to improve the situation, becoming a leading force for better pay and job security with worker protections. Research by Booth and Rowntree highlighted the beliefs of the causes of poverty were potentially false, and the majority experiencing poverty have full-time jobs with low pay rather than poor decision-making, forcing the responsibility on the government to recognise and act to reduce the poverty crisis. This led to the introduction of the welfare system, including child tax credits, pension credits, national health insurance pre-NHS, and unemployment insurance to improve and combat the situation. These safety nets proved vital during the Great Depression. However, many weaknesses were highlighted for more to be done and new programmes to be introduced. This led to the UK greater social spending, and the US introduced social security for older people, working families with dependents, and unemployment benefits. After the war in the mid-20th century, economic advancement became a global focus, including tackling poverty. In the US, Roosevelt said, "The test of our great progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little." In the UK, Robert Webb said poverty could and must be eliminated. There were similar reforms happening throughout Europe and Japan, and the UN drafted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, and Article 25 stated a standard of adequate living, which included access to food, healthcare, shelter, necessary social services, and the security of livelihood circumstances. This was later advanced upon by the Millennium Development Goals, which set about changes to occur between the 2000 and 2015. This set a standard of living that must be protected, and all members of the UN developed this. This chart shows those in the UK that are experiencing poverty. Overall, it remains fairly static, affecting around 14.3 million people. Working adults remains at around 20% or 1 in 5. Children remain at the highest levels of poverty, around 30% or 4.6 million children. In contrast, pensioners have seen reductions from 29.2% to nearly half at 16.2% or 1.3 million pensioners. The reductions are due to the welfare systems. There is a noticeable dip as the country recovers from a recession. This is not because there was less poverty at the time, but lower median incomes. There are arguments that poverty is greater than depicted here, especially as the universal credits replace 6 benefits. Britain's economic stability is in question as food bank demand increases as well as rough sleeping. Others argue low-income families underestimate the amount they receive as there is a mismatch in monetary data and government spending. There is evidence that poverty is on the rise and fears that this will grow to the levels of the early 20th century. It can be difficult to measure poverty as it has different meanings for different people. Charles Booth and Seaborn Rowntree introduced the scientific method. Charles Booth, a wealthy businessman and social researcher, believed Henry Hyman underestimated those that experienced poverty and began his social investigation in London. He published his findings in Life and the Labour of People in London, which represented his poverty maps, a colour-coordinated format of London's East End. Black depicting the poorest and lowest class people, whilst orange depicted the wealthiest. He stated 30% of Londoners lived in poverty or in want, and it was the government's responsibility to ease the burden. Seaborn Rowntree, inspired by his father Joseph and Booth, an industrialist social researcher, did his investigations in York. He established the poverty line at 21 shillings per week. He asked lead nutritionists the caloric intake for a balanced diet, studied food pricing in the area and the cheapest way to maintain this. He said a person also requires shelter and therefore must pay rent, heating and lighting for the space. People also require clothes, household and personal items. This was Rowntree's minimum accepted standard. He stated that 28% of the people living in York lived in poverty, making London an unisolated incident. He published his findings in Poverty, a Study of Town Life, and stated there was primary poverty, where people had insufficient income, and secondary poverty, where people had sufficient income but squandered their earnings on unnecessary needs. Booth and Rowntree both stated that 50% of the people in poverty was caused by low wages, unemployment, illness, old age, and instability, and not irresponsibility. In contemporary times, there are many variables that affect how someone experiences poverty, and that a more profound understanding is needed to assess the poverty impact on social and economical development. Although income analysis is still a highly used method, it is not comprehensive. There are 3 main methods. Households that receive 60% below the average income. This is yearly research with published statistics that focus on those who receive 60% lower than the median. This income is found from wages, benefits, capital gains and taxes, and equivalized for varying household sizes and needs. Absolute low income takes the median base year and adjusts for inflation only to track if increase in wages is having an effect on poverty. Income increases in line with inflation, and the distribution of resources has no impact, including economic growth and increasing inequality have no effect. Relative low income takes the year's current median, and households 60% or below this is classed as the poorest households in society. It is the most used data reference for overall societal growth and the growing gap in equality. Housing costs vary greatly across the country, and therefore poverty should be determined both pre and post housing costs. To measure if poverty is improving, disposable income needs considering after unavoidable costs. Post-housing cost does not include such things as council tax or heating and lighting. The Social Metrics Commission used a hybrid approach, arguing resources needed investigating during research, as well as factors such as disability, childcare, and other needs. The government came up with a new measure in 2020, the Below Average Resource, or BAR. This approach, proposed by the CMC, researches available resources, savings, inescapable costs, and rather than just income-based, and is an effective measurement for effectively combat the crisis and improve living standards.